Can you hear me?
Good.
Welcome back for some more scary stories to tell in the dark, creeps. I am Doc Fugit, and, well, let's just get right into the nitty-gritty. First story I'm going to be reading today is The Viper. There was a man who inherited a house when his uncle died. The house sat on a hill outside of town, and rumor had it that the place was haunted. The man decided to move in straight away despite his reservations. But late that night, the phone rang, and when he answered it, a creepy voice said,
"I am the Viper. I will be there in 2 hours."
And then hung up before he could say anything. Not long afterwards, the phone rang again, and the same creepy voice said,
"I am the Viper. I will be there in 20 minutes.
And hung up. This made the man quite nervous, and he began to wonder who this mysterious caller could be. Before he knew it, the phone was ringing again.
"I am the Viper. I will be there in 10 minutes.
The man was getting more concerned now. A few minutes later, the phone rang.
"I am the Viper. I will be there in 5 minutes.
Needless to say, the man began to panic. Again, the phone rang, and the man slowly lifted the receiver and put it to his ear.
"I am the Viper. I will be there in 1 minute.
Said the voice. The man ran around locking all the windows and doors, and then called the police. They told him that officers were on their way. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Shaking with fear, the man opened the door a crack and asked, "Is that the police?"
"No,"
replied the voice.
"I am the Viper. I come every night to wash and wipe your windows. Where should I start?"
Next tale is The Thing. There were 2 young boys named Trevor and Will. They spent most of their summer vacation hanging around town looking for things to do. One hot August night, the boys were sitting on a fence by the main road. There was a cornfield just across the road. Suddenly, Trevor spotted something in the field. In the darkness, it was difficult to make out, but he thought it looked like some kind of weird animal. He nudged his friend and pointed in the direction of the strange-looking figure. Will said he could see it too. He wasn't sure, but the mysterious thing seemed vaguely human. The next thing they knew, the thing was gone. The boys craned their necks and scanned the field with their eyes. Out of the blackness came the thing. It slowly walked over to the edge of the field before disappearing again. Trevor and Will looked at each other, puzzled. "What was that?" asked Will. "I have no idea," replied Trevor. No sooner had he said that than Trevor felt a clammy hand on his shoulder. He turned around and found himself staring directly into the hideous face of the thing. He let out a yell of terror and surprise. The rotting skin on the thing's face was coming off in places, revealing the bone underneath. For a moment it just stared silently at Trevor with its dark, sunken eyes. Then it suddenly grabbed hold of his arm. Trevor felt his fingernails dig into his flesh as he wriggled out of its grasp. The 2 boys leapt off the fence and ran down the road screaming in horror. They didn't stop running until they reached their homes. They tried to tell their parents and friends about the thing they had seen that night, but nobody believed them. When Trevor woke up the next morning, the scratches on his arms were still there. After a few days, they got worse and worse. Trevor got sick and his parents took him to see a doctor. After examining his arm, the doctor told the boy it was infected and gave him some pills to take. Unfortunately, Trevor's condition got worse and worse. The infection spread to his entire arm, and it wasn't long before his flesh was rotting and falling off. He was taken to the hospital, but no matter what the doctors did, no treatment seemed to work. The infection spread throughout his whole body. Trevor was confined to bed and started to waste away. It seemed like he was beyond help, and as the days went by, he steadily grew worse and worse. His anguished parents could only sit at his bedside and cry as they watched their beloved son slowly rotting away before their eyes. On the day that Trevor finally passed away, Will came to the hospital to visit him. When the boy walked into the hospital room and saw Trevor lying in bed, he was horrified. His friend looked exactly like the thing. And the next one goes out to all you creeps who work in corporate, well, not America, but the corporate world. This one is called Room for One More. There was a young woman who had just started a new job in a large office building. She was walking to work one day when a long black hearse drove up slowly next to her, matching her pace. This made her nervous, and she anxiously watched it out of the corner of her eye. The driver leaned out the window and called to her in a deep, booming voice. "Do you need a lift?" She turned to look at him and got a terrible shock. The driver's face was incredibly hideous and deformed. His skin was a deathly pale, and one of his eyes was noticeably higher than the other. The man pointed to the rear of the vehicle, which contained a coffin. "Room for one more," he said. Frightened by his bizarre appearance and unwelcome suggestion, she refused his offer of a lift. Profoundly disturbed, the woman ran down the street until she came to the office building where she worked. For the rest of the day, she couldn't stop thinking about the strange man in the hearse, and was glad when work was finally over. The woman worked up on the north floor, and when the elevator came, it was almost completely full. She hesitated a moment before stepping in. "Are you sure you don't want to come in?" asked a familiar, booming voice. "There's room for one more." The woman gasped. It was the hearse driver from the morning, eyeing her with his lopsided, horrible gaze. Now, thoroughly spooked, the woman backed away, stuttering, I think I'll take the stairs." The hearse driver just stared at her as the doors slid closed. The woman had only taken a few steps down the stairs when she heard a chorus of screams followed by a deafening crash. She hurried downstairs and discovered the elevator cable had broken, and all the passengers aboard had plunged to a grisly death. Alright, this one's going to be the last one for today. It is called Babysitter. And if you're interested in this one, maybe you should go check out our original story, Murder on the Marsh. We got it up on here on our YouTube channel. Just some food for thought. Let's get into it. There was a young girl who was in need of a job and was able to find work as a babysitter for a couple who lived in a large, isolated old house. They were going out to see a movie that night and left the teenage babysitter in charge of their 3 young children. The babysitter put the children to bed when it got late and then went downstairs to watch some television. She was just getting comfortable when she heard the phone ringing. When she answered it, all she heard was heavy breathing, followed by a man's voice asking, "Have you checked on the children?" Freaked out, she hung up the phone, trying to convince herself that it was just someone playing a practical joke on her. She went back to watching television, but about 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. She picked up the receiver and heard hysterical laughter from the other end of the line. Then the same voice asked, "Why haven't you checked on the children?" The babysitter slammed down the phone. The poor girl was frightened out of her wits and immediately called the police. The operator at the police station told the babysitter that if the man called again, she should try to keep him talking. That would give the police time to trace the call. A few minutes later, the phone rang a third time, and when the babysitter answered it, she heard the heavy breathing again. The voice on the line said, "You should really check on the children." The babysitter listened on him, laughing hysterically for a long time. She hung up the phone again, and almost immediately it rang. This time, it was the operator from the police station who yelled, "Get out of the house! Right now! The calls are coming from the upstairs phone!" The babysitter dropped the phone in shock, and suddenly she heard heavy footsteps walking down the stairs. Without pausing for a second, she ran out of the house as fast as her legs could carry her. Just as she closed the front door behind her, a man's hand slammed against the glass. She screamed and ran out into the street just as a police car was pulling up outside. The police searched the house and found the 2 children upstairs hiding in a closet, crying uncontrollably. In the parents' bedroom, they found a bloody axe lying on the floor next to the upstairs phone. The back window was open wide, and the curtains were blowing in the breeze. There was no sign of the madman who had made the phone calls. He had escaped into the night when the policemen arrived, and managed to interrupt his horrible plan to kill the 2 children and the poor babysitter. Alright, creeps, well, I'm sure that was probably a pretty familiar one. The phone calls coming from upstairs. And no, I'm ashamed to say that it is not very similar to our story, Murder on the Marsh. But, I mean, hey, you gotta plug yourself somehow. And also, I know that when I was younger, this one kind of seemed like it was a happy ending to me. But go back, and if you didn't realize how grisly this ending is, go back and read it like it's one of those fucking math problems from when you were a kid, like a subtraction problem. There's the hint for you. And use some context clues from some of the words used there at the end. Alright, well that's all I got to give you for today, creeps. Got some more treats coming for you soon. Until then, Doc out.